Yeah.
Sure. So Baijiu is a category of traditionally produced Chinese grain spirits, and what I mean by traditional is that they're fermented and distilled as a solid using wild yeast primarily. So they're Chinese grain spirits traditionally produced and fermented and distilled as a solid rather than a liquid. And then I would take the remaining 20 seconds to drink Baijiu with them.
Welcome to the KrisXperience show. Today's episode was recorded quite a while back and somehow got buried in my archives until I recently rediscovered it. I'm really excited to share it with you. My guest is Derek Sandhaus, author of Drunk in China and co-founder of Ming River Baijiu. Derek is one of the foremost experts on Baijiu. He published several books, is an educator and a true ambassador. Together we will talk about this fascinating spirit, how it's made, the different aroma styles, what food it pairs with, and why Baijiu matters both culturally and historically. So let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Derek Sandhaus. Derek, the first question which I have, how do you pronounce it correctly? Baijiu?
It's Baijiu is the Mandarin way of pronouncing it. But the way I like to tell people to say it is just to kind of like construct it backwards. So like in English, we greet people often by saying yo, like yo, what's up? So if you can say yo, then you can pronounce it correctly because it's like bai and with a J, so Baij, and then if you add the yo at the end, Baijiu.
So Baijiu.
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 So it's two syllables. First one is bai, second one is jiu.
Baijiu.
Yeah, there you go.
And what about the terms of how do you have to raise or lower the tone of the voice? Because that's also, I think it's...
So the tones in Baijiu are 2 and 3. So the second one is a rising tone, so it's bai. It starts low and gets high, and then the jiu is a third tone, which starts kind of low, dips and rises. So it goes like so it's a baijiu.
Baijiu.
Yeah.
Baijiu. I'm getting better actually.
Yeah.
So there you go. So if you would meet someone in an elevator and you have 45 seconds to explain what, I know it's going to be difficult, but you have 45 seconds to explain what that beverage is. And I remember when I heard it first time, I said, "Oh, what is this?" What would you say? 45 seconds, 1 minute in an elevator pitch. What is this particular?
Sure. So Baijiu is a category of traditionally produced Chinese grain spirits, and what I mean by traditional is that they're fermented and distilled as a solid using wild yeast primarily. So they're Chinese grain spirits traditionally produced and fermented and distilled as a solid rather than a liquid. And then I would take the remaining 20 seconds to drink Baijiu with them.
And how would you drink Baijiu with them actually? What would be the proper way to drink it?
So in China, it's usually served in tiny little shot glasses that are about 10 milliliters, so about a third of the European or American size shot glass. And it's always drunk communally. So you, in China, never drink by yourself. You always drink with another person, and you always toast. So you need a reason to drink every time. So usually you'll lift your tiny little shot glass. You will make a toast either to the group of people you're drinking with or to one individual that you're drinking with. And then you will say ganbei, which means dry the glass. And then you clink glasses to show respect to the person you're drinking with. You try to get the lip of your glass below the lip of their glass. And then you clink glasses, you drink the entire thing, and then you hold your glass upside down to show the person that you did in fact dry the glass.
And I remember that there was a glass which we got back in China that has 2 different volume measures. Is that right? And then what was the story? The one was bigger and the other one was smaller. Is there any particular reason for that?
I'm not as familiar with Northern Chinese drinking particulars, so I think this particular shot glass that you're talking about, it was 2-sided and one side was small and the other side was big. And I think this was just kind of a gimmick that their distillery does, but it's not something that I've encountered elsewhere.
Discuss Baijiu is made. Where is it made? I know there are different styles, and I will have to ask you also too.
Sure. So as I said, Baijiu is a category of spirits, so it's not a single spirit. China, roughly speaking, is about the size of continental Europe. And they have as many different traditional spirits there as Europe does. So there's probably about 15 distinct spirits that are made in China, and they're all called Baijiu. The government officially recognizes 12 categories of Baijiu. So each one of these categories comes from a different part of China, but most of the baijius in China come from the south, particularly a very narrow part of the southwest around the border of Sichuan and Guizhou provinces. And that region collectively produces more than 2/3 of all the baijiu in China. I think the reason for this is both of these regions are very agrarian, and historically baijiu is very connected to agriculture in China. So it started a lot like, Appalachian moonshine in America as or even Scotch whiskey, as a drink that was made by farmers, mostly serving the rural community before it became a more, mainstream drink. So most parts of China that have an agricultural history and tradition there make their own styles of liquor.
The word means white alcohol, is that correct?
Sure.
And so they would never ever age it in sort of a barrel or something like that, right?
So yeah, baijiu is actually a word, it means literally white alcohol. And it was given to that group of Chinese spirits in the 1950s. There had been other drinks in Chinese history called baijiu, but to use that as a term referring to liquor is pretty new. Before that time, the word for liquor in China was xiaojiu, which means burnt alcohol. And if you know other East Asian spirits, soju in Korean and shochu in Japanese is the same word. So they're all a word that means, broadly speaking, distilled liquor. So would only use that term, and I've gotten lost in the etymology and forgotten your question.
No, I think you answered it. The question about the spirit itself, and so the question was mainly based on where is it made, and you mentioned the south of China, but there are also different styles of light, sauce aroma, and strong baijiu. If you draw a comparison, and it's going to be a stupid comparison, but if you look at the Scottish whiskey map, you have Highlands, Lowlands, Speyside, and Islay. If you would draw a similar map, Baijiu, how would you describe those tastes, and maybe also a little bit the particular process, how those ones are made? So just to put those different styles into, because they're very, very different in a way.
Right.
So they're all white alcohol, but they are hugely different.
So all of these and all Chinese alcohol generally use something called chu, which is spelled Qu. And what chu is it's grain that's been mixed together with water and allowed to kind of naturally ferment or decompose in a controlled environment. So the chu is produced in usually sealed rooms where the temperature is controlled, and they contain mold, yeast, and bacteria, usually in that order. So inside of a chu is everything you need to ferment an alcohol. So if you combine steamed grains with the chu, those will start naturally fermenting. The mold in the chu converts the starch into sugar, and the yeast in the chu converts that sugar into alcohol at the same time. So it allows you both to create solid fermentations, and also because each one of these chus is produced at the distillery, they all have different microorganisms inside of them that give them different flavors. Chu is the most important part of the baijiu production process in terms of generating its flavor. But when we talk about the map of what baijiu looks like, I mentioned before there's 12 officially recognized categories, but 4 of them we think of as like the main styles of baijiu. And those are rice aroma baijiu, which comes from Southeast China. And that is primarily going to have a very mild flavor profile. It's the only one of the 4 major styles that's made entirely from rice. So it has short fermentation times. It uses rice-based chu, and it tends to be somewhere like between like a very like mild sake in its flavor. You can definitely like taste some toasted grains and maybe some like honey like sweetness to it. But it's also very similar to vodka. Like it's very, very neutral as far as its flavor. And then you have light aroma baijiu, which originally comes from northern China, particularly the province of Shanxi, where you and I were there a couple of years ago in Funyang, where that style comes from. And that's traditionally made with sorghum that's fermented with chu that's made from barley and peas. That's fermented a little bit longer, about a month. I think of it as being very dry, very crisp. It doesn't have a lot of the really like powerful umami and like sweet notes that you get out of some other style of baijiu. I think of it, it has like a very like apricot or dried fruit like sweetness, so it reminds me a lot of grappa, particularly on the nose. It's an interesting style of baijiu. And then in the southwest of China, in Sichuan province, you have what's called strong aroma baijiu. This is the most popular style of baijiu. It's made with a sorghum mash and a wheat-based chew, but it's got a couple of interesting production features. One is that it's fermented in mud pits that are buried in the ground for about 2 to 3 months at a time, so very long fermentation processes. And then between each batch of fermentation, they actually remove 20% of the mash and replace it with fresh grains, so that when you're distilling the mash, you distill baijiu with steam. So while you're steam distilling the fermented mash, you're steaming the grains that you've just added. So you've created a fresh starch source, and you can take the mash out of the still and start fermenting it over again. So the same mash is used over and over again forever in strong aroma baijiu. So, and the mud pits that it's fermenting it in, the mud walls of the pits begin absorbing the microorganisms from the mash. So you create kind of a life form symbiosis between the mash and the pit when you ferment over and over again for many years. So they say after about 3 years, you start having a conditioned pit. And after about 30 years, you have a pit that can produce the highest quality strong aroma baijiu. Our distillery that we work with in Sichuan, the Luzhou Laojiao Distillery, they are the oldest distillery in China, and they have fermentation pits and mashes that have been in continuous use since 1573. So,
1573, wow.
It's a really incredibly long commitment to developing flavors. And so this style of baijiu, I think of as being closest to like a pot distilled Jamaican rum. It's very sweet. It has like a tropical fruit, pineapple-y flavor. It also has notes of anise, and it also has like a very like funky, like cheesy, like almost blue cheese, barnyard funky aspect to it as well. So it's quite a unique flavor, but this style is very popular in China, and it pairs particularly well with the spicy food of Sichuan, where it comes from.
This is what I actually, sorry to interrupt you, this is actually what I wanted to ask you as well. What food do you would you pair it? Because the strong aroma baijiu is also one of my favorites, that kind of really, which you mentioned, the kind of pineapple, tropical fruit, that kind of richness. And you get the nose is always a bit strange for me, but the palate, the sensation of the texture, I didn't want to interrupt you, but what would you pair it with? What food? I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that Sichuan richer cuisine, because that's something as well. And if you could also perhaps also kind of Western style dishes, you know, as an alternative to that fantastic Chinese beverage.
Sure. So I'm glad actually you asked me where these different styles of baijiu come from on the map, because that is the key to unlocking food that you pair it with. Because all of these baijius are meant to be paired with food, much like, you know, French wine is served with French cuisine, and like it's a, you know, or like a Malbec is served with an Argentine steak.
Exactly.
You know, this is
what grows together goes together, right?
Exactly. So, like for example, the rice wine from southeastern China, the rice baijiu there, that pairs great with the food there, which is lots of seafood, lots of very mild food with complicated textures. The light aroma baijiu, which is very dry and crisp, that goes with northern Chinese food, which is very like savory. It has lots of like salt and fat. So like cold weather food, meat and potatoes. Like I think you could definitely, you're living in Budapest. I think you could probably pair that with goulash. And
should try it actually. Sounds like an adventure.
And Sichuanese food is what goes with strong aroma baijiu. We're talking about very spicy food, so lots of chili peppers, the Sichuan peppercorn, which is like a numbing ingredient, but also lots of like raw garlic, raw chilies, very like just, you know, spicy, bright flavors go very well with it. So in terms of what to pair it, like you could even like just like buffalo wings, like something with like a really like spicy sauce is going to go well, because that style of Baijiu, it's very complex and it's very sweet. So like the sweetness and the texture of it like really coat your mouth while you're drinking, so that like it makes the spice level of the food like go down a little bit, but the spiciness of the food also brings out the like complexity of the drink as well. Which brings us to the final of the 4 styles, which is sauce aroma Baijiu.
Yeah.
And this style comes from about 50 miles southeast across the border of Sichuan with Guizhou. And that comes from a town called Maotai, which is also the name of a brand that is very famous. Guizhou, like Guizhou is the province, Maotai is the town where it comes from, and Guizhou Maotai is the world's most famous Baijiu brand. So this style is also produced using a sorghum mash like the last 2. It uses a wheat-based chew like strong aroma, and it's fermented in pits as well, except the pits for sauce aroma Baijiu are stone. So they're not actually part of the fermentation process other than being a container for the mash. What they do with this is very unusual. So they ferment and distill the same mash 8 times over the course of 1 year. The first 2 cycles that they ferment and distill this mash, they do add in fresh grain. But the last 6, they're adding nothing but chew to the mash. So every time that they ferment this mash, the alcohol level is getting lower and lower, and the grain itself is getting more and more cooked and caramelized. So the final like flavor of all these different cycles blended together is going to be incredibly like rich, umami, savory. So you think of all of the umami flavors in the spectrum, like mushrooms, soy sauce, nuts, caramel, blue cheese, sesame in particular is a very strong note in this style. That's your flavor profile, and the food of Guizhou is also very spicy, so lots of peppers, but it's also very sour. So this style of Baijiu pairs really well with foods that use pickled vegetables. So this would pair well with of course, pickles, pickled cabbage, pickled radish, whatever. But it also goes quite well with spicy food as well. So that's, generally speaking, the map of Baijiu. It's mostly in the south, but light aroma can be found farther north.
So the final question, I think, if I quoted correct, Henry Kissinger once said, if we just have enough Muay Thai, we can solve all the problems of the world. So there must be some sort of connection always in terms of history. What was your kind of initial thing that made you think about getting involved in such a deep level with this product? Was there anything, any wow or aha moment that you said, this is something which I want to devote part of my life? Was any particular Baijiu, any particular stories, which was the initial Kickstarter of this whole thing?
Sure. So for me, I had been writing about Chinese history for a long time before I started writing about Chinese spirits. So my early encounters with Baijiu were all casual, and it tasted quite a bit different from the alcohol that I was used to drinking.
You can say that aloud.
It confused me. I didn't really like or appreciate it very much the first several times I encountered it. But one thing was really bothering me about this, because I knew on the one hand that this was something that didn't appeal to me, but it was also something that I knew was the most popular spirit in the planet. And I knew that hundreds of millions of people were drinking this drink every day, and it was their favorite thing to drink. So the question that I wanted to answer was, why? Why is this such a popular drink, and why don't I appreciate this? What don't I get that
others get?
So my exploration of Baijiu and starting to write about it was very much an attempt for myself to figure out what it was that I was missing. And thankfully, I discovered very early on there was a lot that I was missing about it. Otherwise, it would have been a very unpleasant topic, I think, to research. I discovered, first of all, and the most important thing to learn was that Baijiu was not one drink. It was many drinks, all called Baijiu. So the first aha moment was when I went to a liquor store and bought like 5 or 6 different Baijius and set them down next to each other, called up some friends. We went out to dinner, And we tried drinking these different bottles of Baijiu, and just it was very obvious having them laid out next to one another that this one doesn't taste anything like this one. This one I like more than this one. And just starting to break down like what it is I was dealing with, like as a group of liquor. But also, as I said, I came to it from a historical perspective. So for me, like researching the history of Chinese alcohol has been a great joy, because the Chinese have, to our knowledge, been making alcohol longer than anyone else anywhere on the planet. And alcohol's always been a really important part of Chinese culture, both like the religious rituals in ancient times, but also the hospitality rituals. The way that you like greet someone and you take care of someone is, you give them food, you give them alcohol. That's a way that you establish trust with one another, and that's how you show respect to another person. So that was endlessly gratifying, and I think that maybe the best aha moment for me was like as I gained an appreciation for Baijiu, as I became not just someone who understood why other people liked it, but started loving it myself, was that it really unlocked a part of China for me that I was missing the first several years I liked. I was missing the first several years that I lived there because I wasn't participating in the local drinking ritual. I was drinking my beers and I was drinking my wines, and I was doing this in very like westernized European like cultural spaces. I was doing this at bars and nightclubs. I wasn't doing the drinking at the restaurants with the Baijiu, where most of the drinking and socializing in China happens. So even if it's something that you don't understand at first, it's something I think that really pays off in terms of like the work you put into understanding and appreciating Baijiu, because it allows you just to see a side of China you wouldn't see otherwise, and that for me has been incredibly rewarding.
Fantastic. And there's just one final last question. Was if there's one Baijiu which you would take to a desert island with you, and there's a fridge and there's everything, so what would be, would it be your brand, or would it be a different Ming River, or would it be a different Baijiu? Which you could take two. You could take one Ming River and another one just to be.
Well, I'm not going to take Ming River.
Okay,
that feels immodest, but I will take another brand that my distillery makes.
Okay.
So there's a brand at the Luzhou Lajiao distillery in Sichuan that is called 1573. And that is Baijiu that's in it's a very high-end strong aroma Baijiu. So it has a lot more kind of herbaceous umami notes than a lot of strong aromas do. So it's much more earthy and rounded and complex. And it's the Baijiu that I first kind of fell in love with in China. It was the first Baijiu that I tasted where I was like, that is a magnificent drink. Like, it's not just like a great Baijiu. This is a drink that I think anyone who likes to drink alcohol could appreciate how amazingly complex and satisfying this drink is. So Luzhou Lajiao's, it's called Guojiao, National Pit, 1573. So this contains in the blend small amounts of the Baijiu that's fermented in the oldest fermentation pits in China. You mentioned that. So it's also a bit of taste of history as well.
So you could technically say that there is going back Baijiu from the 16th century in it as well. Technically,
you can say that when you drink 1573 that you are drinking from a mash that was alive in the time of Shakespeare.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. There you go. And what would be the other one?
The other one, okay. If I'm gonna take
just you got two. You got two.
If I gotta take a second Baijiu with me, I might take. Well, I'm not gonna take another strong aroma, even though I'm tempted, because I want a little bit of variety. Maybe I'll take one called Lao Guilin, which is It is a rice aroma made at like the most famous rice aroma distillery, a place called Shanhua in Guangxi province. And Lao Guilin is a rice aroma baijiu. I think it's stronger than most rice aroma baijiu, so I think it's somewhere between like 45 and like 52% alcohol by volume. And it's made entirely from glutinous rice, which has a lot more starch and like natural
the sticky rice.
So it's this kind of like really delicious. It tastes like it's hard to describe. It's somewhere between sake again, but like a more like rich, sweet sake, and like it sips really easily, like a whiskey. So I highly recommend people try that if they can get their hands on it.
I think that sounds awesome. That sounds fascinating, Derek. I mean, you could talk much longer. Glad that through the spirit competition, I also got to know Baijiu. I'm getting better with the pronunciation with some measure. So it was really fascinating because you learn a lot through this whole thing. So I'm really glad to you as well that you wrote a book, Drunk in China, the last one. It was really fascinating for me that you through the drinks and the food, and in this particular case through the drinks, you get to know the cultural aspects which may be hidden or a little bit also secretive in a way, right? Because let's say the strange aromas and flavors and the strange profile what Baijiu has to Western palate. So I'm really glad that you introducing us to this fascinating drink. So thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Thanks a lot.